Hey everybody, welcome to Q Plus EDU. I'm super thrilled to have you here with us this evening. My name is Frederick. I am Out Youth's Texas Gender and Sexuality Alliance Network Coordinator, and my pronouns are they, them. I will be recording the session tonight, but participants will only be recorded if they are currently on screen, so audience members don't need to have any concerns about privacy. And I will pass it over to E.
Hi everyone, I'm E. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the founder of Q Plus EDU. I am so excited to be here with everyone today, and I will be here mostly moderating the chat. So throughout this presentation, as any links or resources are mentioned, I'll be dropping those in the chat, and those will also be posted alongside this event on our website. And then throughout, if you all have any questions or comments or things you want to share, feel free to do that in the chat as well. And I will be moderating. We're going to take questions throughout the panel, and then we might have an additional Q&A at the end. But I will turn it over to Tasneem to introduce our panel.
Hi everyone. Before we get into prison abolition, I would love to kind of touch on colonialism and anti-colonialism because I think a land acknowledgement is important for all these types of events. So in honor and recognition of the land we are currently on, this land is traditionally inhabited by Comanche, Gualitecan, Apache, Tankwa, Mexica, and all other tribes that are not explicitly stated. We honor Yanawana, water of the spirit and spirit of the water that flows through Central Texas, and all ancestors and guardians of this place. And we acknowledge that Native peoples and their descendants are here with us today. So hi everyone, my name is Tasneem Islam. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm going to be the moderator today. I'm currently an upcoming junior at UT Austin, studying women and gender studies, plan 2 and pre-med, and I'm really passionate about the intersections of healthcare and capitalism and dismantling the medical industrial complex. And I'm gonna pass it on to Nikki Isak.
Hello, my name is Nikki Isak. My pronouns are he, him. Currently, I'm a rising senior at St. Edward's University. I'm a senator there. I'm also a tutor in the math lab. And currently, that's what I have going on. And I will pass it to Naomi.
Hello, my name is Naomi Wilson. I am a racial equality and trans equality activist here. I've also recently been a part of the founding of BTLA, which stands for Black Trans Leadership of Austin. We seek to sort of create tangible change for Black trans people within the state of Texas and hopefully beyond that. I'll go ahead and pass it to the next person.
Hi, my name is Shannon Wilbur. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a lawyer at the National Center for Lesbian Rights. And my work involves advocating for LGBTQ young people in the foster care system and the juvenile justice system. Really happy to be with you here today.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists. So I want to start off by kind of giving a little background or setting intention for why we're meeting today. It's to kind of understand and address the prison industrial complex and how it specifically and disproportionately affects LGBTQ plus youth. So going into that, I want to first ask a few questions to Shannon. The first question will be, how many youth in the juvenile justice system identify as LGBTQ+?
So LGBTQ plus young people are way overrepresented in the justice system. The available data that we have nationally shows that about 20% of young people in detention self-identify as LGBTQ plus. That's probably an undercount because in that environment, I think some people, even in an anonymous survey, don't feel comfortable necessarily self-identifying. We're starting to see some places actually collecting that information from young people, and those numbers are pretty solid across the country. We don't have those numbers for Texas because if there's anybody in Texas collecting that data on sexual orientation and gender identity, I'm not aware of it and I was not able to find any. But I think that we can assume that, like the rest of the country, LGBTQ plus youth are very significantly overrepresented. And I want to mention here too that when we're talking about queer and trans youth in the justice system, by and large, these are young people are also youth of color. So really important to keep in mind the kind of intersecting systems of oppression that contribute to their overrepresentation in the system.
Thank you. Knowing these numbers, does anyone here, any of the panelists, want to kind of address a little bit of background for the Stonewall riots and kind of the revolutionary movement for queer and trans people? Anyone?
I'm going to make a quick comment. What I think is kind of, I have a really bad way of speaking, but I was going to say funny, but what I mean by funny is, isn't it sort of obvious and sad that, like, whenever you're speaking about specifically people in prison or people incarcerated, it's I automatically knew that those kids were kids of color. Like, the prison industrial complex itself, I mean, is something that derived from slavery. Like, it's legalized slavery in modern times. And who were the slaves? People of color. So it's just kind of not surprising, but I would hope that people, when thinking of like prison abolition, that they would sort of think about the race, like race and how it plays into that, and racial injustice, because it's not just like locking up criminals. Essentially, it's trying to legalize slavery and further oppress the marginalized, and who is obviously one of the most marginalized people in society. It's the intersecting queer and Black kids. Like, so yeah, I'm not surprised, but that was definitely the first time that I had those kind of numbers read to me like that. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi, for touching on a little bit about prison abolition and like the reason why the prison industrial complex started in the first place, you know, to incarcerate like Black, queer, and trans folks, and also just like Black folks in general. It is like a form of legalized slavery. So thank you. Does anyone else want to touch on just a little bit about like the prison industrial complex, or why we're fighting for abolition right now?
I'll just say that in addition to having its roots in slavery and oppression, the prison industrial complex, I mean, locking people up is enormously harmful. I mean, it's strange to even have to say that, but there's nothing about it that helps anyone, right? It particularly for young people who are still developing, locking them up is enormously expensive. It's really ineffective, and it doesn't do anything to even advance its supposed purpose, which is public safety. And what we've seen over and over again is that strategies that meet people's needs in their own communities and their own families does way more to promote public safety than punishing people and locking them up.
I actually was having a quick conversation with one of my friends yesterday about this subject, and we were they asked me, well, Naomi, like, what would the world look like without police, right? Without police and without prisons? And they were like, say you woke up in like some place and then, you know, there's just no police, right? And you know, I would have the control to be able to solve all the issues, right? I'm the one in power in this fantasy. And, you know, a lot of the things that people go to prison for are often things that don't even need, like, that kind of punishment needs to be served. Like, they don't need to be locked away for stealing. They don't need to be locked away for, you know, trying to survive in their environment by like selling drugs or doing sex work. Like, if I had the power, I would certainly focus on what is aiding these people into committing these acts that may not be safe for the, for society to function, and serve those needs first, by giving these people, like if they're stealing food, if they're stealing cigarettes or whatever, why don't we provide them with the things that they need first? And then I feel like, one, that would kind of dramatically reduce the need for policing and for like a prison industrial contract, because there would be no, like, I mean, it's my brain is, it just makes, this whole subject just makes my brain explode, because it's like there's so many, like, I was thinking, like, I don't even really want to talk about like not like abolishing the police, right? Because like what I really want people to do is just start like thinking about like what, like, how can we better serve our community, and instead of further oppress our community. So that's what really stresses me out. I'm just like, I would figure out what are the driving factors of these issues. Why are these people in this part of life where they're having to threaten other people for resources, yeah, threaten other people for resources, than freaking throwing them in jail for trying to survive. It really frustrates me, and it's really sad as well. So I don't know.
Definitely. Naomi and Nikki, do y'all want to both kind of touch on y'all's experiences, being affected by the prison industrial complex, like as like QT BIPOC?
I guess I'll go first, or if Naomi, you want to.
No, I was gonna say I've talked a little bit.
Okay, cool. So I'll just start like from my very beginning, I guess. So when I was 17, I had gotten arrested for shoplifting from a Dillard's. And back then, like, I didn't have these thoughts. I wasn't having these conversations that we're having now. I didn't. It's kind of like yesterday we didn't, or, I guess 3 months ago we weren't thinking about police abolition, but 3 months later, here we are now, and we're visualizing a world about it. So like back then, I didn't, even think that was possible. But yeah, so like I got arrested for that at 17. And the interesting thing about Texas in particular, as well as maybe like 3 or 4 other states, it's really not a common thing, is that when you're arrested at 17, you are tried as an adult, not a juvenile in the criminal justice system. So my first offense, it wasn't even that big of a charge or that much merchandise stolen from a multi-billion-dollar company. You know what I mean? Like all of these like factors were playing against me, and I just, in the moment I was like, I felt really remorseful for it. I was like, this was peer pressure. I was just trying to fit in. I feel really bad. Like I felt a lot of shame about it. And then as the years went on and whatnot, and I became enlightened about like what exactly like I was put in jail for and what I was charged for, and my age and all this stuff, I was like, I was really taken advantage of, actually. Like, like that Dillard's would have been just as, fine if I had walked out of the store with all that stuff. And then I've had some people come at me and say like, well, what about the workers there? Like, you stealing merchandise from the company as a whole, like, has an adverse effect on like their wages and stuff like that. And I was like, no, that's untrue. Like, minimum wage is a statewide mandate, like, just raise it and Dillard's would have to follow. So that was the first one, just a petty shoplifting crime at 17. And after that, I mean, totally not on purpose. I at 19, I was arrested for possession of controlled substance. And this one is a little bit more complex because I had just gotten off probation for the first offense, and so like I was doing everything I could to just not get arrested again for the rest of my life. And so when it happened, like it just felt like my life was falling apart. But the thing that I've noticed was that both of these crimes were things that like one, I mean, I'm sure we all shoplifted something before. And then two, like the controlled substance was an edible. So in reality, like it's just, you know, the active substance in weed, but because it was an edible, it was a controlled substance. So it wasn't just bud. But a lot of these things are very arbitrary. Like the second that marijuana or, you know, THC, all these like things related to that are legalized, like my record is irrelevant. And the other thing is that both of these crimes did not make me a threat to society at all. I wasn't harming anybody or anything like that, and never was I intending to do so. So that's kind of a synopsis of my background. I'll pass it to Naomi.
Yeah. So my history kind of is like, so fortunately for me, like I definitely kind of, I mean, like I've shoplifted, so I want to like relate with you on that. Is like, you know, who the heck hasn't shoplifted? Fortunately, I wasn't caught, but kind of where I started to deal with more police involvement in my life was because in school I did a lot of like, you know, retaliation because I was being bullied. I did a lot of skipping classes because, you know, bullies, like my situation was very like reflecting now, I'm having to do a lot of like self-forgiveness because I'm like, well, I could have just stayed in school, I could have just gotten better grades, I could have done this, I could have done that. And in reality, like society wasn't supporting like me as a Black queer person. I remember going to school and having people tell me I was going to die because I was Black and gay and I was going to get AIDS. Like it was not an environment that I could thrive in, and the punishment for me not fitting into this environment where someone like me is not protected was having to go to court and have the police involved with my life. And then you know, my mother had to pay money, and fortunately we're not in the state of California where she could have gone to jail because I went to school maybe, you know, one day out of the week, if so I want like one day out of the whole month. And I think about it and I'm just like, that's really shitty, like how awful. But another thing too that I think about is how so through sort of being outcasted and then getting into like activism, I started looking at like the way that I kind of see being an activist nowadays is kind of like, you know, it's sort of a bad analysis now with like Harry Potter because of J.K. Rowling's whole mess, but there was like a good bit where it's like, I think in like the third or fourth book where Harry Potter travels back in time and he saves himself. And so that's kind of how I see activism now, because I recognize that, you know, unfortunately there are not that many like, you know, like of course not every Black trans person is progressive, but like, you know, there's not very many Black trans people who are fighting for prison abolition, and these are things that I care about, right? And so I'm like, okay, well, I guess like if I want to help myself in the past, which is not possible, but I know there are people who are still suffering the same things that I had because they're systemic. I wasn't special, right? I wasn't the special Black trans kid that happened to have police involved with their life. So that's why I feel so passionate about like being outspoken about those issues. And so fortunately, I'm very like well-mannered and like I know a lot of my limits and I know like how to take space. And so through activism, I protested a anti-LGBT church for about a year. And what I noticed is that like, you know, this church that's trying to uphold cis white and heteronormativity and my queer Blackness, like, you know, laughing in front of their face with like my boobs out and stuff. Like I understand like the limits of that, and I understood that they wanted to see me out of all of the protesters be the one to go down. And what that did is it sort of developed a reputation with the Austin Independent School District Police. They kind of like, I'm pretty sure if they had like a terrorist watch list, I was on it, because it was like every event I went to, the police were like, you know, like had a profile on me. They're like, oh, that's Naomi. She's always making a mess. She's always causing a scene or something. And that's really messed up. Here I am just trying to better the life of people like me. And they're asking, like the school board and the city and the state and the government I use quotations a lot, and because whatever. But like, they're asking for people to speak. They're asking for these experiences so that they can get sort of an understanding. Whether or not they take that seriously or not is up to them. But I do need to be that voice, because I noticed that I didn't have someone who had an experience like mine representing that, right? So it's important to me now, and it's important. It would have been more important to me back then. So that's why I'm so passionate about it. And of course, like, if I was sitting in a room, and a bunch of like homophobic, super religious, like jerk, like, I'm so bad. A bunch of jerks like ended up calling me disgusting in the audience for like just being myself. And that's when I turned around and I was like, I just started, protesting in the crowd, calling them out on their BS, because it's BS. And what happened, instead of society making it safe for me to be in that room, the police are the ones that escorted me out. And it's just escorted me out for being targeted. And it's just sort of ridiculous. And so eventually that escalated to me getting arrested for protesting them for having a rally that they did not have a permit for. I, as an activist, like, realized that, people with homophobic messaging get the platform so often, like, we hear their arguments over and over and over again. And so I took my space, I took my body, and I put it on their front line, because I knew that they were in the wrong, and I knew that they didn't have a permit. Like, they just kind of showed up out of nowhere. And I was like, you know what? Like, it's well within my right to stand up to them and put my body on the line. I was hoping that I wouldn't get hurt, but it turns out, like, the police, who are trying to protect this white heteronormativity, would arrest me and throw me in jail for the night. And it's just like, it's really ridiculous. I just think that, like, that's where I kind of learned a lot of, like, they aren't really here to protect us. They are certainly here to they're there to protect what they think is normal, and that's deeply unfair. And of course, for some reason, Black people just aren't a part of the norm. People of color aren't a part of the norm, because we sit here and we are getting these super high sentences so that they never have to see us in the streets. So I'm sorry, I get really heated talking about that. Like, I'm still mad about it.
No need to apologize. Thank you. And like all this anger is like very warranted and valid. And like Naomi, you're saying, like, this is systemic. Like, it's not a one-time, like, one-off incident. So like, I want to bring back to Shannon and kind of address, like, how are LGBTQ plus people, like, especially youth, criminalized? And then, like, what happens to LGBTQ plus youth once they are, like, caught up in the system?
So what Naomi was describing actually is a really common scenario where queer and trans youth are basically punished in one setting or another based for being themselves. So the school situation that you were talking about, Naomi, is, everybody's heard of the school to prison pipeline. And for queer and trans youth, that is a really common kind of pipeline into the justice system. Often, as you describe, young people are being bullied and taunted and harassed in school, and either they leave entirely and they don't go to school for reasonably enough, or they eventually fight back. And when they fight back, they're the ones who get punished, and they pick up a charge for assault or something like that, and then suddenly they're in the justice system. So the sort of common thread that we see in either on the streets, in schools, in other settings, is punishing people essentially for expressing who they are, either through their clothing and their mannerisms, or through their speech, Naomi, like you were describing, what they have to say. And that same kind of discrimination happens once young people get caught up in the system too. So the same bias that happens in schools and in communities and on the streets and with the police also happens in the justice system. So what we see is that queer and trans youth are way more often detained, for example, in a locked facility, even for very low level survival kinds of crimes, or the things that Nikki was describing, that where nobody's been hurt, really, there's no harm that's been done. So it doesn't obviously protect public safety to lock folks up who have, an edible. Like, why? So and then once they are locked up, there's a lot of data and information that shows, especially queer and trans youth who are out and open about their identities tend to be mistreated a lot, either by other youth or by the staff. So there's really high levels of physical abuse, sexual abuse. Sometimes folks are isolated, either as a punishment or as a means of keeping them safe from this harassment. And I'm sure you've all probably heard and read about how horrible it is for any human being, but particularly for a young person to be isolated for any period of time is just emotionally and physically so very harmful. So, I mean, I could go on and on. There's all kinds of things that happen.
Can I actually add note to that? Like, whenever I was arrested, they put me in isolation because they didn't know where to put me. And then it was really funny too, because like they were asking me about, sorry, I say funny, but like, I'm one of those people, I'm very optimistic about the way that I speak, but funny isn't the right word for this description, but they like asked me a bunch of questions about my genitals when I was being arrested, and then which was like really invasive, and I was in such trauma that I don't remember if I answered them or not, but like that was so weird. And then it was also weird because like I do have my name and gender marker changed and all of my paperwork changed, but they were still sort of questioning where I belonged because of my body. And it was just really weird. But yeah, they ended up putting me in isolation because they had no idea where to put me. And I'm like, is that really the protocol? Like, oh, we're gonna just put you in isolation. That's just such a joke. Like, that's so dumb. I don't know.
No, it's horrible. And it's there aren't that many laws that protect queer and trans young people, but there is actually a federal law that prohibits them from doing all the things you just described, Naomi. They can't house you according to your genitals. They can't automatically house you in the male unit or the female unit. What they're supposed to do is talk with you about where you feel safer and make an individualized decision where you'll be the most comfortable and the most safe in these facilities. But jails and prisons and detention facilities are very gendered they couldn't be more gendered, right? Everything, you're either male or female, your clothes, your program, your housing, everything sort of stems from that initial decision. But you can imagine, and maybe you had some of these experiences, that trans youth in particular are just brutalized in these places if they're housed according to their assigned sex rather than their gender identity. So that's another thing that happens once young people get caught up in the system.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. And so Naomi kind of touched on a little bit about your experience being jailed and like experiencing that. Nikki, do you want to kind of share your experience with that as well?
Sure. So the first time when I was 17, I wasn't really like out per se, but like I was always passing my whole life, so like I never really like went through like the some of the emotions and feelings and processes that other folks have gone through when coming out. But I guess I kind of had a similar situation as Naomi too, because I was 17, I wasn't able to be put with adults like 18 and above, just for legal reasons. But also, I wasn't able to be put at the time in a male facility either, because I had gotten arrested with a friend and he was cis male, and he got put with like this other kid that like also got arrested that night, and so I was just left in general population, like an outlier or whatever. But that experience just sort of like was, I don't know the word for it, I guess just like I just wanted to hide like the day I got out, because I would have to go back to school and I knew that kid was going to say stuff, and just start speculating and guessing and questioning, like, why wasn't he housed with me and stuff like that or whatever, like, oh, I knew the rumors at school were true and stuff like that, so that was that experience. The second one when I was 19, so not too long after the first arrest, like I had started hormone therapy, and my changes happened pretty quickly, and so by the time I was 19, I was, essentially cis passing, but I hadn't had any surgery done yet, so I didn't have any neighbor gender markers changed, so I was just automatically housed with females, and as much as I hate like saying this, I felt safer that way because I hadn't had any surgery or anything, but also I was housed with my sister, and just from experience, like women are more understanding and accepting when it comes to people of the LGBTQ plus community. So I, ideally, like that wouldn't have been my life at all. But in the moment, like whenever I'm scared and just trying to defend myself and I don't know what's going to happen, especially in a place that's not home. Like I was 8 hours away from where I lived, so I was just like, okay, yeah, I'll accept this in this moment. So.
Thank you for sharing that. Shannon, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's not uncommon, Nikki, for trans boys and men to make a choice to be in a female unit, and really that should be respected if that's where you feel safer, and that's really the process that should happen, is a conversation with you about what the options are, and even under federal law, they're supposed to take seriously your feeling about where the best place for you to be in these facilities. And obviously, there's no good place, right? But you reminded me too of some of the other really difficult circumstances for trans youth is in some places, like if you've been taking hormones, they just stop them when you get locked up. They just like automatically stop them, which is really terrible for you physically. And I've had people call me and just say, how do we get this young person connected to a medical provider who understands what the medical standards are and can support this person in their transition or in their current gender identity. Luckily, there's more knowledge about that now. And recently we just won a case where we actually supported a trans woman in federal prison to get gender confirmation surgery in prison, which is a really big deal. I mean, that usually doesn't happen, as you might imagine. But I just wanted to mention that as some of just, prison and detention is horrible for anyone. And it's particularly horrible when everything there just doesn't reflect who you are, right? And doesn't let you be who you are.
Yeah, I also kind of want to bring back to the point of like, these are like really dehumanizing punishments for very minimal offenses. Like mine was like a Class B misdemeanor, and I had to suffer with being like misgendered and harassed by police, like for protesting. So it's just, it's sort of ridiculous. And then this is something that, again, is not only happening to queer people, but it's happening to Black people, it's happening to poor people. And so really, I would hope that the audience is watching, is really thinking about, not about like what's a more just punishment for these crimes, but what's a better society that would support people, that would support people from feeling the need to protest against an anti-LGBT hate group, right? Like to prevent people from feeling the need or being punished for petty crime like theft or possession. Like, it's certainly not prison. It's certainly not. But I can't even imagine. I'm having trouble even nowadays imagining, like, maybe for like a very violent person who can't function in society, they would need to be like relocated. I wouldn't even say put in prison. I think that they definitely need some guidance. But like, just having prisons exist, especially for profit prisons, they're wanting to find a way to get people in those. So they're going to do whatever they can to get them in there. And what's happened is now we've got people in prison who have no business being in prison. So
I think we've learned a lot. I hope we've learned a lot by what we've seen happen with COVID as well, because, people in jails and prisons are at really, really high risk for being infected by COVID. And some of the more progressive jurisdictions across the country tried really hard to get a lot of young people out, right? And to reduce the population in at least 30% across the country. And the kinds of young people that they're releasing are exactly for the offenses, Nikki and Naomi, that you're describing. Low end survival crimes, no one's harmed, there's no particular purpose for them to be locked up. So you have to ask yourself this question: if these folks can be released when there's a pandemic, why do they ever have to be locked up in the first place, right? Why would we ever go back to that practice of locking up people who don't need to be locked up?
Thank you for that question. Yeah. I also want to kind of touch on, if any of the panelists are comfortable, just like what your experiences, like how your experiences affected you mentally and emotionally, and like how they kind of changed your views on prison abolition today, or kept them the same.
I guess I didn't speak up quick enough before we ended the last question, but I just had a quick comment to make, sort of like relating to the for-profitness of a lot of these prisons, criminal justice system, all that stuff. One thing I noticed for sure was that whenever I was going through my punishment for my arrest and all that, right off the bat, I quickly found out that they were just trying to get my money more than they were trying to like rehabilitate me. And I mean, personally, I didn't need to be rehabilitated. Like I wasn't a repeat shoplifter, or I wasn't stealing grand amounts of money from people or whatever. And I didn't have a drug problem. But I was put through all these programs, and I had to pay to get put into these programs, and I had to pay legal fees and court fees and lawyer fees and all these things. And by the end of it, I was just broke. I didn't learn much. I didn't feel better about myself. I didn't feel like I was ready to re-enter society, because I didn't have those feelings to begin with. But like, I was just broke. And I guess that can like segue me into the question that was just asked. I guess like all like the mental, emotional, financial, even physical, I suppose, like feelings that I had, like they all intersected. That my arrest happened basically back to back. And at that point in life, like if you think about it, like I was graduating high school, I was entering college, I was figuring out what I wanted to do with my life, and I was dealing with all this. And in reality, like, you know, we're told from age 5 till forever, like academics is most important, getting your education is most important. But this was the most important aspect of my life at the time. I was getting terrible grades in classes. I was dropping classes. I had no motivation to like do anything else but just like put this in my past. And like at the moment, like I guess you don't even think about like, okay, how can I make this optimistic situation? How can I be an activist now? How can I help people who have been affected the same way I have? Like, I just wanted to be like a fly on the wall. I didn't want to be noticed. So for the longest time, I think, and I still honestly think that like sort of hindrance in like my social life, because I mean, it happened in high school and then first year of college, like, I don't know, you're looked at in a certain way, and you don't know how to like introduce yourself to people and stuff like that. Like, I still feel like I never really recovered like socially from it. You know, like I don't want to go up to people and meet them on a surface level basis and say, okay, this is me. I want them to know like this is my past and like this is who I am, and that's how I'll introduce myself to people instead. So I don't know, like I guess like the way I see myself and the way I see my peers, like we are very different people because from what I've gone through, what they haven't gone through. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Nikki. Does anyone else want to touch on that? Or if not, it's okay. Now we kind of, address like y'all's own experiences, being affected by like policing, the prison industrial complex and things like that. And so we can kind of sort of move the conversation into, so why prison abolition, and like how, what can like LGBTQ plus youth do to advocate for closing down prisons and things like that, or just like all youth, what can all people do to fight for prison abolition?
Yeah, I would like to kind of call out the people that are making arguments against police abolition as terrible people, right? Like I just want to outright like if you're sitting there and you're trying to figure out, well, we need this for that, and they need this, and it's a terrible system, and we just need to not focus on how to reform it. We need to focus on how to making society better. That's what I really meant when I said, like, I don't really even want to talk about police abolition because that's obvious. That's obvious, right? Like the system as is trash. What we need to talk about is how are we going to better the lives of people who are suffering. And I feel like if we start answering some of those questions, and if we start making arguments for improving those like quality of life for marginalized communities, which would be people of color, poor people, LGBTQ plus, like I think we would see dramatic drops in crime in our society. That was like that's almost obvious, and there's examples of that like all throughout the world where you have like, I don't know, some other countries like New Zealand who have like a prison population of like 12 or something. I don't know. But they just have like, they just deal with prisoners way better than the states do. Like it's really disgusting to hear people try to legitimize a system that is descendant of slavery. So what I try to do when I speak about prison abolition, because I don't necessarily understand like exactly how that would be implemented, like what would it look like, but I think even questioning what it would look like is better than advocating for what we currently have. Like kind of constantly thinking like, well, have the police ever actually stopped me from being mugged? Like thinking in ways that like the police kind of were more reactionary than they were proactive, sort of thinking in those kind of things. And that's kind of how I'm trying to push my mind forward into understanding a world without prisons and understanding a world without police as we know it. So.
Totally agree with Naomi about trying to meet people's needs in their own communities, and in particular, providing services to people who are traumatized by the ways that they're discriminated against and stigmatized in their families, in their schools, in their communities. I mean, queer and trans youth overall are at very high risk for depression and suicidality and other kinds of conditions that really are associated with trauma. And if we prioritize meeting people's needs, and sometimes it's like housing, food, jobs, really concrete kinds of services, it's far less expensive than prisons. It actually promotes people's health and well-being. And like I said before, it is really the best public safety strategy, because people who have what they need are less likely to do harm themselves, and are more likely to be successful in school and in other places where we want to see young people supported. So I agree with the strategy of like needing just services to meet people's needs, like asking people, what do you need? How can we help you? But other really concrete things, getting police out of schools. Police out of schools would way lower the number of arrests that happen in the school setting, and that's a really common trajectory into the justice system, and getting rid of private prisons and the whole like money, the connection with, like Nikki was saying, basically people who are making money off of other human beings. So getting rid of privatization, I think, would shrink the system a lot very quickly.
Oh, actually, can I add on to like with your tangible solutions for people in need? Like that's kind of why I started thinking about BTLA, which stands for Black Trans Leadership of Austin. We're very new, so I'm trying to put that name out there because you guys should get to know us. Like we're a pretty cool team of people, and kind of that's like our motto is like we're tired of like one platitudes. We're tired of people coming up with I don't know. We want like tangible. We don't want like reform. Like we do want reforms, right? But like, well, I guess what I'm saying is we need tangible solutions, right? Like we need, like as the Black trans community, we need food in our fridges, we need a roof over our heads, and we need monies in our pockets. And all three of those things, I would think if every Black trans person in America had those basic needs met, we would automatically see a major decrease of like Black trans women being murdered. And I feel like that's sort of radical because like we already are like targeted. But imagine if we had a place where we are safe, right? Imagine if we didn't have to steal to eat. Imagine if like we had to commit crimes to survive. Like we would be putting ourselves in a much safer environment. And again, it's more of a proactive approach to crimes, instead of a reactionary one where we're caught and then we're in jail and then we're dehumanized and then we're murdered and then we're poor and then we're murdered on the street, and then it's just so frustrating. That's why like whenever this kind of what really motivated me to start BTLA is because like I was thinking like I don't need anything else but a roof over my head. And so that's kind of what kind of got me sort of talking to the community and organizing. And we're trying to, like raise funds and build an organization that will provide these things to Black trans people or trans people in need, like we're highlighting the Black trans community, but it's for any trans person in need in Austin, Texas, and eventually the world, right? Like that's my dream. Because I don't think that, you know, waiting for change is going to save anyone's life. Like we could, like if I had a house that could house 30 trans people in right now, I would have saved 30 trans lives, and we had 26 or 27, it's almost 30 or more die last year, right? Like that's, you know, that's actively affecting those numbers. So that's kind of how I want to see progress in the world, and let the prison system as it is die. Like just let it just crash. Like let's no longer have a need to put people in prison. Like have a place for them to go. Sorry.
I kind of just wanted to make one quick comment that sort of ties into both what Shannon and Naomi have talked about. So I guess if we're trying to like prison and police abolition is such a huge like idea, and it's going to take a lot of work, and there's no like one solution to how to do it. But whenever I think of like a tangible change, it definitely revolves around money. I mean, I think it all does, right? Or like everything does. So one idea like that we've seen in the past 3 months that has been absolutely beneficial to people who have been waiting for money their whole lives is mutual aid. Like if we have all these funds that are raising money for poor people who are at risk of eviction, trans people, you know, Black folks, everybody, like if we're willing to redistribute our own resources, if we're able to, obviously, like that's helped so many people. That's helped keep shelter over people's head. That's helped people get their hormones. That's helped people just get food. Or it can look like, you know, the free fridges that have been popping up around Austin recently. So I think things like that, like, you know, we know that a lot of these crimes that people are put in jail for are petty crimes or survival crimes. And if we can deter that, you know, taking care of each other as a community, and deter that by just helping people out like monetarily or with shelter or with food, then that makes prisons and police like, you know, obsolete. So
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I totally agree. And I wanted to add, like, I think a easy way to look at it is like, you know, equality and freedom and like respect and justice are all things that replace prison. So I think that sounds like a pretty solid trade in my opinion. Also, yes, BTLA does have a Facebook page, and that's Black Trans Leadership of Austin. It's got like a little Black lady and a pride flag. And then we're working on a website that's btla.squarespace.com. And that hasn't like officially launched, but you can see some of our like dream projects on there. So that's how you'll find us.
This is a really good conversation on just like dismantling capitalist and colonialist structures. And so I kind of want to dive a little more into that, like prison abolition and like anti-capitalism, anti-colonialism, like all intersect with each other. And how do you see like tangible solutions or even just like a vision of what this world looks like?
One thing that really interests me is how much momentum there is, even among really conservative people, for closing youth prisons in particular. Sometimes for reasons that aren't quite as humane as what we're talking about, but just because they're so expensive and, you know, sort of such a terrible public policy, because they don't work. They don't do anything good, anything positive. So I live in California, and along with Texas and Florida, California locks up a lot of people. We have a lot of prisons and a lot of jails in California. And on in the youth side, we're literally about to close all of our state level youth prisons. There were 11 of them at one point, with 11,000 young people in them. there are 3 right now with 700 young people in them. And probably in the next 2 years, there will be 0. And that's at the state level. And then, at the county level, some counties are deciding it just isn't worth it anymore to have a youth detention facility, and they're closing them. So it's, and crime is not going up, which is really, really interesting, right? Because the argument always is, public safety, people need to be locked up. These are dangerous people, blah, blah, blah. And that it turns out that that's not true. So I feel like trying to build on that momentum, not just because of the issue of money, but really pushing with an alternative vision, like a transformative vision that talks about what Nikki was talking about, where it's really redistribution, right? It's really resources that are redistributed to people who need them. And, a minimum wage, guaranteed housing, guaranteed medical care. I mean, the kinds of things that help people live healthy lives I really do believe that if those things were available to people right now who are living on the edges, it would follow naturally that fewer people would be locked up. So like just really changing our focus from punishment and surveillance and policing to a public social safety net where everybody's needs are met. That is the transformative vision.
You know what I kind of been noticing around my town, like obviously defund APD has been like really popular here. And so what I kind of noticed is that like someone in my neighborhood went and spray painted over the D part of defund APD, so it just says fund APD now. And I just thought that was really funny, right? Because that's really stupid. One, that's really dumb because they're already funded well over than they need to be. But what I would kind of like to change a little bit that I think would be able to reach more people is talk about like redistribution, like how you were talking about redistribution of funds and resources to people that do need them. And it's kind of like why I created I didn't create BTLA, but that's kind of why BTLA was created in the first place, is because we're not trying to, what we're trying to do is avoid asking the community for money and for funds and for resources, and we're trying to find a way to speak to these giant billionaires, these giant millionaires to help the community. And it's unfortunate that we have to beg them, but that's kind of what the whole premise of it is like, I don't want to pull resources from a community that already needs them. Like if you're a person that makes under like fucking $60,000, I curse a lot, I'm so sorry. But if you make under $60,000 a year, like I do not need your money. Like you need your money more than I would ever need your money. Like it would be helpful. Like if you want to do it, you can do it. But like what we really need is we need like tax reforms. Like we need like, new taxes, like a wealth tax. We need like Medicare for all. I love that idea. We need prison abolition. We need to like reinvest these funds and maybe not talk about where they're coming from. Like maybe that would make people feel a little bit more comfortable if we're not talking about pulling them from the, like maybe it's not like defunding the police because they always have these like nightmares about not having police. But if we talk about reinvesting in the community, maybe they would understand a little more. So I'm trying to, I'm very like far left, like radical thinker. But I'm also I'm a Libra, so I'm trying to balance that out with like, how can I make like radical leftist ideas more approachable? So.
Yeah, I'll just say this one little, I guess, more like theoretical piece. So like going back to like what I said earlier, like 3 months ago, we hadn't envisioned a world without police, without prisons, but now we can definitely visualize it. I think that that thinking should be applied to things that allow policing and allow the inequity that we see that is so far to the extent that it is today, like the wealth gap, for example. Apply that to like capitalism as a whole. Like, I think we've been under the illusion that for so long, like capitalism has led to these progresses in modernity, like technology, medicine, materialism, automobiles, whatever it be, we've attributed it to capitalism. But in reality, like that wouldn't have been possible without like the working class, the middle class. You know what I mean? Like it's those people in those communities. It's not capitalism. And now we're seeing that capitalism is actually creating more inequity, like that is like equatable to like Victorian era inequity. Like the rich are so rich and the poor are so poor, and we think of that as like so like such an old concept. Like a lot of people don't realize how poor people really are. You know what I mean? So I think if we think like that, like we think like, okay, so why are billionaires getting more rich during a pandemic? And why do they hold more wealth than like literally half of I'm speaking in terms of the US, I suppose, but why do they hold more wealth than like 50% of the rest of the population? Is that really modernity? Is that really progress? Just ask those questions, and then, you know, you can figure out the answer yourself. Okay, now visualize something else because you know what the answer is. And then, you know, we do the same work that we're doing for police abolition and apply it to that. So.
Yeah, I kind of, I guess I want to like kind of think about sort of how, okay, so capitalism is trash, like as it's working, it's horrible. It's literally like, there's no end to capitalism, but there is an end to the planet. Like we can run out of resources, and like it's certainly something that we're noticing a lot more, and will be noticing a lot more within like the next 50 to, you know, I think it's like 10 or 50 years now or something. So we have to stop the capitalism. And what's funny is like people seem to like not understand that like there was society and there was like humanity and culture before the dollar existed, before currency existed. And I feel like that like was just an ultimately more sustainable reality to live in. I don't know if it was perfect. I don't know what that would look like, but I do know that, you know, we could live without money, but we live in a society where you can't, which is crazy.
This is just a recommendation. I highly recommend watching Zeitgeist Addendum. It'll tell you all about currency and money and how just stupid it is.
I was just going to add something that I don't think we talk about that much when we're talking about public policy or demands. And that is to really look for leadership who emphasize and openly talk about compassion as the basis of our interaction with people in need, rather than how to lock folks up, how to punish people, how to other people, how to, you know, denigrate and harm people, really. And to create a public policy platform that's based on compassion, because it's missing right now. It's really missing. And I feel like being unashamed to use that word and to ground public policy in a compassionate response could make a really huge difference in terms of what comes from that, and how we think about social problems, and including eliminating the horrible prison industrial complex.
I totally agree. That would be kind of cool to see, maybe like a legislative package called like the compassion, like an act of compassion. Like what a fun Ain't it? I'm over here like, wait a minute, that's cute. I am not a thing. Like, I don't know. I'm just having a gag right now. I'm sorry.
It's so funny you say that, because I was just talking to a bunch of lawyers, and I know lawyers are not probably have the reputation for necessarily as a group being so compassionate, but we were talking about exactly that. Like, if we could write a new federal statute in the justice world and what it would look like, what we were talking about is how it would have to have the word compassion in the title, and how that would just be like totally upending the system as we know it now, right? Just turning it on its head, upside down.
I guess the thing I also like to think about is like how successful I guess capitalism could exist with like if racial equality was like legitimate, or if everyone really got a fair chance. And I guess like you can't capitalism sucks. You can't even think about it. Like you can't even think about it. I'm like, wait a second. I'm trying to think like, because like historically it's always been like cis white men who have accumulated the most wealth in society. So like you can't really even argue that capitalism would work if it wasn't that, because that's not the reality. Like, so we just need to like, make them less valuable, make them less relevant, make them have less impact in society. And the opposite of that would be like, to redistribute their wealth. So I don't know. I can't even make an argument for capitalism. Like, geez.
We have a question here from Faye, and they're asking, what do you say to working class friends who are afraid of repercussions of striking, for example, like losing their job, as like advocates and activists here?
Ooh, I would say if you've got enough friends that will strike with you, go ahead and do it. Like, you're gonna make so much news. You're gonna push the narrative. I mean, like, yes, of course, you have to like take precaution of your own safety and your own stability. But usually a lot of strikes are fairly successful, at least to some degree, at least media wise. You would definitely get a lot of media recognition for striking if it was like substantial enough. Like I wouldn't strike on my own, right? I would just get fired, or I would get sued by the company or something. But if you're able to build like, a network of friends and a network of coworkers, and like legitimately like strike to where the company has to like shut down at least one or a couple of its stores, I would say definitely take that stand, because it's certainly important. And then I think that you would, one, be supported by more community members than you think you would be. And so you would be fine for a while. And I think you would be fine until you got another job. Like, finding a job is so, like, I mean, it's hard, but like, there are so many jobs, sort of. COVID sucks, but you could definitely get another job. It's way worth more like striking, because then you can make a company lose like a lot of money for treating you bad. Like, that's great. That's my opinion. I tried to I tried to organize like a union, and I wanted to do a strike. So I'm not gonna say which company, but I currently am still low key. No, I'm not. No, okay, never mind. That's secret. That's secret. Top secret.
Yeah, I'll capitalize on the COVID thing. I mean, if there's a time to do it, it's definitely now. I mean, personally, I don't think anybody should be working during COVID, and everybody should be compensated by their companies until COVID is ended by the government. But I think now would be the time to do it. And I think you would be able to convince a lot more people that you work with to join in. I mean, I've never organized or participated in a strike, but I think companies are definitely weaker now more than ever because of the pandemic and because of all of these social issues that are surfacing. So yeah.
Frederick, I had another question in the chat. Can y'all speak about the links between workers' rights and prison labor? And like I would add on to that, like in those anti-capitalist notions.
Can you repeat that question one more time? I have to think about it.
Yes, it's in the chat, but we, if y'all don't have anything to say, we can move on. But can y'all speak to the links between the workers' rights and prison labor, like the use of prison labor?
This is not really my lane, but I would just make the observation that in this current political reality, labor unions have been really seriously weakened. I mean, I grew up in Detroit in the 50s and 60s, where there was, an actual labor movement, and striking was an option because it was always in numbers, and it was there was a strong support for labor. And that's really been undermined by lots of policies in this current administration and even before. And we see a resurgence of prison labor as basically, uncompensated labor, right? So those two things go together. It's like taking advantage of people and using people and disempowering people so they really can't stand up for their own rights. And I guess I would say this is a time when we need privileged allies to stand up, because they're the folks who are not going to be losing their living and their means of livelihood when they push back against these really horrible policies. Because I think it's actually a huge dilemma right now. As a low-paid worker with no union protections, striking is, it's you could lose a lot. Let's just put it that way. As much as I support labor, I just feel like policy-wise, it's no longer supported the way that it was.
Thank you. And so I want to kind of gear the conversation towards moving forward, like call to actions, safety measures and things like that. And wanted to see y'all's thoughts on what we can do now, within our own communities. Like, what does policing look like within our communities, and what does anti-policing look like? And I especially want to kind of touch on like the election coming up. There's a quote by R.J. Lord that says, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." And like this situation, being like the electoral system as like master's tools, and like the master's house is like, white supremacy, capitalism, colonialism, all of these things. And so what thoughts do y'all have about that moving forward?
I guess when it comes to like the master's tools kind of thing, I love that quote. Oh man, that was such a good quote. I understand that there are reasons to work within the system, and then there are also reasons to work without the system. Like when there was protests for like days in the streets and like people were destroying property, I understand like, small businesses being affected and things, but there was a significant amount of awareness brought to the BLM movement because people were so fed up. And I would kind of want something like that to happen, because like there are issues that are happening in the country that are just as important, but don't get enough publicity because there aren't enough people who like are angry about them, like with immigrate like ICE and stuff. Like I would love to see like a whole city like block up and burn down a precinct, like burn up an ICE building, like yes, like I so believe in that. But I also like I have friends who will be like, "Oh, why do you even vote? It doesn't matter. Like you should just go like, free people yourself." Like I think that it's important and it's important to do both. I think it's important to be aware in your local politics and your government and your nation or your whatever. But it's also important to, take action when you have the opportunity to. And by taking action, that can be dropping your ballot in the ballot box too, to at least say, like, you know, even if it's not really like it doesn't matter because we have like electoral politics and things, it is important to, you know, represent yourself in a way that, you know, other people can't, especially here in the States. Like if like with immigrants, like immigrants can't vote, but they are having their freaking humanity stripped. So it's crucial to think about both sides, and I think you should sort of get comfortable with both kinds of actions.
I guess I'll kind of piggyback on that. I definitely, definitely don't want to push the idea that electoral politics are going to change anything that needs to be changed adequately, because they're not going to. Like right now, we are literally picking between the lesser of two evils, and if that's really what you think is gonna, move us forward and tackle the issues that need to be tackled, I mean, it's just a little bit naive. So we do need to continue doing what we've been doing this summer and not take off pressure. I mean, we've seen more progress and demands met and change in this last summer for lots of groups of people than we have, since Obama took office. You know what I mean? Like, and we've also figured out a lot of things that we know that, okay, I'm just going to use the Obama administration for a specific example, but I mean, we know a lot of the things that he did in the Middle East, but we still like praised him so much. And I mean, personally, I think we need to get away from that sort of, settling for like, yeah, okay, he did this, but it can be excused because he did this, which was even better. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think we should settle anymore. I think we should rely on community, not on elected officials. I do still think that if we have the privilege to vote, you should, but you shouldn't stop there, especially if you have the privilege to. And then also just keep putting pressure and forcing change, and by any means necessary, really. Nothing is off limits.
Would just make the observation again, what we've seen in the last several months, and it's just old-fashioned organizing, right? I mean, people showing up in huge numbers makes a difference. It really does. It's like George Floyd was not, I mean, many Black people have been murdered by the police. What made this particular murder just totally, people hit the streets, and suddenly you're seeing people talk about issues that they never even talked about before. Like they just was like, wow, I guess racism really does exist, or I don't know. I mean,
that kind of made me think of imagine someone like Hillary Clinton being like, Black Lives Matter. I was so mad whenever she did the whole like hot dogs in my bag thing to pander to the Black community. I was like, girl, that's such an embarrassment. Like that's kind of what's funny too, is like what bothers me is like we do have a very real movement, but I do think that is like it's sort of being like co-opted by these multimillionaires and people in power to be like, yeah, I believe in Black Lives Matter, and then they like never actually do anything. So yeah, definitely like we definitely have to keep the pressure on them, like certainly keep the pressure on them. And I think threatening them in their jobs, which is like being elected, that's a good way. And then also showing up to their house when they make the bad vote, like we're here and we're suffering because you do not actually represent us. So yeah. I don't know.
I just wanted to say one other thing too, because it's something that I think about a lot in my own work, and it's kind of a dilemma for me. because on the one hand, I think abolition is definitely the way to go. We need to shut the place down. And on the other hand, I'm really aware that members of our community are locked up right now and are still in there. And so there's this part of me that wants to continue to fight for even the small things that make their daily life more livable while they're locked up. And at the same time, fighting to just get rid of those institutions entirely. I feel like we have to do both.
I think Angela Davis's book, Our Prisons Obsolete, kind of really touches on that. Like the struggle, this dilemma between like short-term solutions, but also like long-term solutions for like dismantling the prison industrial complex. And like something that like she wrote about was kind of how a lot of reforms that, you know, liberals and Democrats have pushed for have actually increased the number of prisons all across the nation, which is just like, it's such a struggle because you want better living conditions, but then at the same time, it's it's going completely the opposite way of the prison industrial complex, like the opposite way of like prison abolition. So like, I definitely understand the dilemma of like, everyone should definitely read that book as like a starting point to their abolition education.
Yeah, I think actually you might have mentioned this to me after you read the book, but like just think of like if right now you're in a more reformist mindset and you think that reform is going to fix the issues of the prison industrial complex, of policing, of inequalities in our society, well, all of those things were birthed from a system that is capitalism, and if you're reforming it, you're only prolonging that system to exist. You can't abolish it if you are reforming it. So you need to analyze, okay, am I really reformist or am I an abolitionist? If you're reformist, well, I mean, you might also be a racist. I'm just gonna say that, so.
Yeah, I would say maybe a reformist is more comfortable with racist systems than an abolitionist would be. That's kind of, I think I'm gonna take that one. I'm gonna take that one into every new conversation I have about police abolition. And we'll be like, so you're okay with people being like dehumanized and forced to work?
There's a question here by Aubrey. What advice would you give in terms of support to help and support a queer or trans person who is currently incarcerated? Open to all the panelists.
Put money on their books. If you have that information, put money on their books. That'll help them with like food, survival. Like, you know, some people actually, there was a story that I volunteered with this like letter writing group, and one of the letters, one of the inmates that I would write to was a woman who couldn't get out of jail because she didn't have the money to get out of jail. Like, I think it was like a $500, I don't know exactly, but it was like $500 and she needed the money so that she could get out. But if she didn't have it, she couldn't get out. So put money on their books, like help them get funds. I mean, if you know they're in jail, write them a letter. Like all of these things show support, like help share their name. Like if they send you a letter, if you have something from them, you know, share it with your community and be like, hey, this is a person that like needs support. Like if they're in jail, it's like that's literal hell. Like it's terrible. So but yeah, I would say money on the books is very important, and then also sharing their story is very important.
Yeah, I would second that. I feel like I don't know how long they are going to be incarcerated or how long they have been, but I feel like they're probably going through really stressful just dysphoria. I mean, just giving them confirmation that their gender identity is valid, and that just because they may be in one place, but their gender identity doesn't match that place, does not mean anything. Yeah, and especially whenever they get out, just helping them get over their gender dysphoria in any way possible, because that's probably what they're really struggling with right now.
sort of along the same lines. I feel like as a lawyer for folks who are locked up, the single most important thing you can do is let the institution know that you're watching. Because the most horrible part for people who are locked away is that they're invisible. It's like nobody sees what happens to them. And I mean, I sort of, for a long time, I've thought if members of the public had to like walk through a prison just to see what it's really like, I kind of wonder whether we would continue to have them the way that, because they're so inhumane and so horrible. So that is like, you know, shining a light on what happens in these institutions, and also letting that person know that you see them. You know, you see them, you remember them, you're in touch with them, you're like paying attention, so that they're not just completely alone and with no power and no ability to control anything in their lives.
I think too, I remember, because in the letter writing lessons that I learned from this woman, whenever inmates start receiving a lot of letters, like bullying from staff within the prison as well starts to dissipate, because they now have an outlet to report to. Because like sometimes, like, you know, an inmate will get raped in jail, and then, you know, who can they go to? Like, if they're, especially if they're raped by a staff member, like, who do they go to? So if they now have a network of people outside that they're communicating with, you could, you know, save someone's life in that manner. So it's certainly really important to keep contact with them, and then also help them with resources if you can. Also remember too, there was a couple of but instances where we were writing an inmate, and then the officers would move the inmate and they wouldn't tell you where they moved them to. So it's also really hard to keep track of them sometimes. But try your hardest to keep contact. It's very important.
We have about 3 minutes left, so I want to open up the floor to any last minute thoughts, discussion, questions, or anything that you want to throw out there for the audience members.
I want to just throw out, like, you know, be okay with being uncomfortable. Like, start putting yourself in situations where your beliefs are challenged for the better. Because it's very hard. Like, I'm certainly going through it still. Like, I'm still don't understand things, and I don't, you know, I don't have a fully developed idea of certain things, but I care enough to try to think about them. So at the bare minimum, like, try to put yourself in a position where a better world exists, where these terrible racist systems and oppression exist. Like, try so hard to think about how we can dismantle them. Like, it's going to be hard, it's going to be uncomfortable, and you're going to come up with tons of excuses as to why you shouldn't, why something should exist. But like, work very hard to find reasons as to why you can find something better. So that's how I live.
I would say, I think completely, like, stripping down what you think you believe about the world, and critically analyzing it, and then building it back up in a more unbiased, unracist, unsexist, all of those things in that way. And I think you'll find a lot of truth, but you'll also find yourself going, oh my God, I can't believe that's real. I mean, I think you can do this by reading radical texts. Also, don't rely on mainstream news media for your news. I think a lot of us know that if it hadn't been for Twitter, Instagram, things like that, we still wouldn't know that there are violent protests going on in Oregon, Chicago, all these places. So take all of the mainstream news media that you see, take it with a grain of salt. Yeah, I think reading is your best bet too. Yeah.
Oh wait, can I add on to that? Stonewall was a riot for a reason. Well, throwing it back at the title. Like, It really, right. Someone's in the chat, like, I feel you in the chat.
Just a real quick thing. I feel like for me, one of the most important kind of touchstone rules for my work is really pushing back against normalizing inhumanity. And I think a lot about a day in the future when we will look back at what we are doing to one another during this period of time, and just be completely shocked that supposedly a developed industrialized country treated people as horribly as we treat people. And just to never normalize that, never normalize it. Inhumanity is inhumanity, period.
Ooh. One more thing. I keep thinking of so many things. It's like, can we also, I just want to put out to the audience, can we also not have cops at Pride, right? Stonewall was a riot against police. Can we not have them at Pride celebrations? Can we figure something out that would look amazing for the queer community, okay?
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to our panelists and the audience members for listening in. If anyone wants to close us out.
Yeah, thank you all so much for being here with us. This was a wonderful reminder that the system is not broke. It is working exactly the way it was designed to and for whom it was designed to work, and who it was designed to work against. We really hope that y'all will join us on Thursday for our panel on LGBTQ plus immigration activism. We also have a panel tomorrow on non-monogamy called Vet Check Split. And Friday, we have a panel on queering your classroom, and we would love for y'all to join us with those as well. Thank you all so much. This has been a phenomenal panel. I am super, super grateful to have been in your presence. And I think, yeah, leaning into humanity and compassion is definitely the way forward here. E, if you want to join us back on video, otherwise I will close this out, and yeah, we'll hopefully see y'all on Thursday.
Yeah, I just dropped links to our upcoming panels this week in the chat. Again, we'd love if you would join us for those. And I'm also putting a link to our feedback form. We always love to hear what you thought about this panel and any other Q Plus EDU sessions that you've attended. So feel free to fill that out if you want to. But yeah, this has been great, and thank you all so much.